Cool. Now I can project. Cool, so we got audio, we got video. Sweet. Cool. Thank you so much for letting me come and speak to you guys. I hope it'll be interesting stuff. We're going to be talking about Rails and Webpacker, using Webpacker with Rails. I've spoken here before, worked in Ruby for a number of years, worked in some other technologies as well, and it just so happened that the last project that I got to work on that we just rolled off of a week ago was a Rails app that used some Webpacker and used some React on top of that. And so that was fun to get into, and I just wanted a chance to share about it. It seemed like a moment ago that a few people, but not a whole lot of people, have used Webpacker in their Rails apps before, so it'll be fun to talk about. This is going to be not a tutorial on Webpacker or on Rails, but sort of a case study. Like I'll talk kind of what they are in general. I said Rails. You guys know Rails. We're going to talk about React a little bit, but not a tutorial on React. And just kind of show you an example of when you might want to get into it. And it's not going to be super long, so we got time to kind of discuss, ask questions, thinking about like what your experience has been, dabbling with some of the latest and greatest JavaScript and other contexts, maybe try and React or other single page app front-end frameworks. It'll be fun to kind of talk about and share information. So my name is Josh. I work at Big Nerd Ranch. I actually got the job here from this meetup, so I'm very grateful for this meetup. I really like working there. And yeah, I am just very broad in my technologies now. I really love Rails, like working in different JavaScript frameworks and other stuff as well. So I'm kind of the guy that always brings up something else that's off topic whenever I'm at a meetup on one topic. So this is a bit what I just said. We're going to talk about what Webpacker is. It's an official Rails thing, and it's becoming more official over time. Case study, why we went with it for this client project. I'm going to look at the code just very briefly. Not all the details of what it takes to build a React app, because that's incredibly overwhelming, but just kind of how it sets up, how Rails passes over to React and back over into Rails, things like that. I'm going to assess what we thought about it on this project and how it worked out for us, and then we can discuss and get into any other questions, thoughts, we can talk with one another. So we've got to talk about sprockets and the asset pipeline to start out, because this has been the way that JavaScript as well as other front-end assets have been handled in Rails for years and years. I bet you some of y'all were around in Rails a couple versions ago before the asset pipeline. Anyone? Got 1, 2, okay, 3, yeah. So it has always been there as far as I've known about Rails, because I'm only a few years in. But I really credit the asset pipeline with, maybe this isn't over an exaggeration, but I really feel like it invented or at least popularized the front-end build process. Now, if you don't like all these complicated front-end build processes, maybe, it's not that great where we turned out. But before that, things were definitely not great. I mean, I was working in PHP code bases even as recently as 2014, where it's like, okay, you got JavaScript files, like, get ready to add a bunch of script tags. So the fact that Rails provided an opportunity years and years ago to combine those into one file, to add those SHAs so that they're cached, but also the cache is broken when something updates, really great. I mean, just made our apps so much better. So Sprockets and the asset pipeline has really served us well. Even just recently with Grunt, with Gulp, and even in Webpack itself, which we're going to talk about some, if you want asset fingerprints for the caching, like you got to configure that yourself. Like that's not going to come for you out of the box the way it does in Rails. And so just like in every other area, we get these awesome, amazing conventions that allow us to build better things in Rails, which is really great. So things are changing in the front-end world. Here are some logos of things that exist. So there's new JavaScript syntax. The things picked up, I don't know if it was like 5 or 6 years ago, I mean, I guess 2015, I guess, would be the year that things really picked up. But whereas the language of JavaScript had stagnated for a number of years, and my understanding is that CoffeeScript kind of came in to fill the gap, where it's like, we need something better to write our front ends in, so CoffeeScript was invented, really, really helpful. But then like the official ECMAScript JavaScript committee, was able to get a plan together to make changes and improve things. So things have gotten way, way better over the last couple of years in JavaScript. And with tools like Babel, again, this is probably a review for a lot of y'all, but tools like Babel, we get to use the latest JavaScript features even when not all of our browsers support it. So it'll take the code you write and it'll transpile it. You can specify like what browsers you need to support. Do you need IE 11? Really? Can you get away without IE 11? Okay, cool. Take it off the list. We don't need to transpile down that far. But it'll let you write the latest JavaScript code. So NPM is a package manager for JavaScript. And there's just tons and tons of packages. I love what Dave said on the podcast. It seems like there's more JavaScript libraries than people. And just in life in general, I feel like that's the case, yes. And so, those are out there. And so whereas in the Rails world and in the Ruby, I guess mostly the Rails world, when we want to pull down these JavaScript dependencies, like, we wrap them with a gem. Like, you pull them down, but like we can't keep up the pace with all the JavaScript dependencies that are coming out there. You search on Stack Overflow, you find out about something that's available in JavaScript, but now you got to do a mental translation. How can I make that work in Rails? Is there a gem? Do I have to make a gem? Really? Like, that's kind of frustrating. So there's some gymnastics as just the momentum of JavaScript itself has picked up so much. And you have sort of build tools like Webpack. There's some other ones as well, but this is the logo for Webpack that allows you to, that's a good way to summarize that. Rather than just have a bunch of JavaScript files and getting them all munged together, you can sort of specify, like, here's my main application JavaScript file. JavaScript has these import statements built in now, so you can say I'm importing these files from this directory or this kind of shared library. And so Webpack can pull up your application. It can tell exactly what dependencies you're using and which ones you aren't. It knows the order they need to be included in to get it all to work. You don't have to worry about script tag order or order of the requires in the manifest file or anything like that. So there's a bunch of other things. Webpack can automatically split up, semi-automatic, split up your JavaScript so that other parts of it are loaded later, only when needed. So you don't need to download the whole JavaScript file for your whole front-end application, just the ones that are needed as users go through the features. So there's a bunch of cool options there. So the maintainers of Sprockets is like, how do you keep up with this when JavaScript is becoming the biggest language in the world? There's tons of investment being made in it. Like, so, to have Sprockets and the asset pipeline keep up, that would be a ton of effort that would be required. And I know they're still working on it, making improvements and fixes and things like that. But to provide an option, I don't know the exact thought process, but to provide an option, someone probably at Basecamp built it and then extracted it, because that's the way these things tend to go, a tool called Webpacker that wraps Webpack, which is the JavaScript thing, and Webpacker is the Rails-specific library that wraps it and makes it available to us in a convention-based way. And this is really good because Webpack configuration files are famous for being impenetrable. And if there's one thing that Rails developers hate is impenetrable configuration files. So Webpacker, the Rails feature, hides that all away so that we don't need to mess with it in most cases. So you may be getting a little frustrated with me right now, and if you've been to one of my talks before, it's like, wait, Josh is talking about JavaScript at the Ruby meetup again. Like this, I'm here to talk about Ruby. There's other meetups I can go to. This is kind of frustrating. The only thing that I can say is that I planned my schedule really poorly, and I was at a JavaScript meetup last night, and if you're frustrated, the JavaScript developers are even more frustrated. So let's take a look at a few of the slides there from my presentation last night. Had this one. Well, in Ruby, we wrote the test like this. But I was aware enough at least to show that, when I say that I want to talk about how I write tests in Ruby, that nobody cares. And yet, that's still what I talked about for the whole time of the JavaScript meetup. So, like I said, I can't stay focused on one technology, so we're talking about JavaScript here. So let's get into Webpacker a bit. And again, I'm definitely not an expert in these things, so if any of y'all have been tracking with the history of more, please chime in. From what I can trace, the Webpacker feature or library of Rails was made, it works all the way back to Rails 4.2. It was available in Rails New with the Webpack flag in Rails 5.1 and beyond. But it's actually going to become the default JavaScript compiler in Rails 6, which may be any day now. I don't know. We're a couple release candidates in. It's been there for a while. So hopefully soon Rails 6 will be finalized. But we're on release candidate 2, so you could definitely try it out. Give it a try, see if you can find any bugs. So it's the default JavaScript compiler. But that's not the case for, Webpack can handle CSS and image assets. But Webpacker is not going to be the default for that. The asset pipeline will still be the default for CSS files, if you want to do Sass, processing your images and things like that. The asset pipeline will still do those. But when when Rails generates JavaScript files, it's going to generate JavaScript files in the directory for Webpacker. They're going to run through Webpacker. So it's this interesting place. Some people had some pushback on that. It's like, well, when we have to really learn and know the old thing for front-end assets as well as the new thing. And DHH had opinions on that, and probably others in the thread had opinions as well. But this is what we have for right now. And one of the things I like about that is, Rails is server-rendered web applications. You got HTML, you need CSS across your whole website. And so being able to have your CSS set up in the normal way, where it's like, I've got Bootstrap, I've got my files, like this is the CSS for my site, that makes sense to me to keep running through the asset pipeline. And then Webpack is very targeted on, this is one application or mini front-end application in here, and any CSS that it needs connects to that. So that's why there's a both and thing, but that's the pull request, if you can remember that or type it into your browser real quick, if you want to check it out, where it got merged in and the discussion happens about it being the default JavaScript compiler in Rails 6. But this is why it's good timing. Like it's helpful to know about these things so that if you create a new application or upgrade to Rails 6, either A, you can know what happens if you know, Webpacker starts running, or if you want to decide that you don't want to go with it, you'll be informed. You can make an informed decision. So let's jump into the case study. And without talking any more about Webpacker in general, we're going to look at the case study and then look at the code and how it kind of got hooked up in there. So the client I was working with was a big church in town. They got like 6 or 7 campuses. It's called North Point Community Church. They wanted to work with our company because they wanted to build new websites. You know, this, you might be wondering, as some of my coworkers are, why a church is going to a consultancy to get a custom website system built, but they're big enough that that was a benefit. And I've worked there in the past, and I saw some of the challenges they had with the CMS they were using, so it made sense to me. So it's a church content management system. So, you know, Rails is a great fit. They already use Rails for all of their systems. It's great because it's the right level of abstraction. They don't need to be getting into low-level performance stuff. They just need to build sites that have business functionality. It's a perfect fit for Rails server rendered pages, so this is not a React application. You know, people are browsing, they're viewing pages, they wanted to get downloaded. I don't want everything on every page to be dependent on JavaScript. It's not a good idea. On most of the back-end pages, the admin interface, most of those pages just is simple CRUD. See a list of records, edit it, save changes, get validations. It's all the stuff that just Rails is perfect for. So for almost everything, using Rails in the normal server rendered way we've been doing it for years works really, really great. Incidentally about this, working at Big Nerd, talking to different Rails developers, I've heard 2 different opinions on CMSs, content management systems. The first is to always use an off-the-shelf CMS and don't reinvent the wheel and build it yourself. And then the second is to always build your CMS from scratch and don't use a system off the shelf that's going to lock you in. So if anybody has opinions on that, I want to know, who agrees with opinion 1, you should always use an off-the-shelf CMS and don't build it from scratch? All right, we got a couple. Yeah, it depends, right? All right, who feels about you should always build your CMS from scratch in Rails and target it to your system? We got a couple and a half. This is a fun conversation we can get into at the end as well. So there was trade-offs. The reason they decided to go with custom building a CMS from scratch, a lady named Amy that I worked with there said that, so we were using an expression engine website before this. It's a PHP CMS for like bigger things than WordPress. And so there are all kinds of plugins, right? Like we got plugins, we got extensions that we can pull down and just connect and we get what we need. Like we get analytics, we get comments, I don't know if they have comments, like just whatever features we need from all these plugins. But Amy said, it kind of feels like that pirate robot from the Lego movie, where it's like we got a shark for one of the arms and the other one's a couple of cannons and like, okay, it works, like it can walk, but like everything feels like it's just not quite right while it's there. So this is why they wanted to go with a Rails CMS. It's like they've got years and years of like, here's exactly what we need for our websites. You know, the content editors are not hired to be computer people, and so we want to custom build like exactly what's going to give them like all the terms, all the validations are going to be just what they need to build just what's right. So that's why we built a custom CMS here. So again, all this is normal Rails stuff, and up until this point, we would have had no need to go with anything else. But there was one requirement when they were talking to us. They said, okay, like there's this one part of the website that you need to know about, and it's the page editor. And so on the page editor, you can add different sections. You can add little blocks within them, and then you click on it. You can choose different types of content to put in there. You can move stuff up and down, left and right to move it around. And I was like, they want us to build Squarespace. We're going to build Squarespace from scratch here, like this, and they want an estimate for how much money this is going to take to do this. But luckily, as I dug into it, they did some design work internally. They were working with another consultancy. The design they got was like an awesome 80-20 situation, where they realized the cost, and so they're like, we don't need drag and drop and move everything everywhere. We need a few different options. And so like the fact that like there's up and down areas, you can't just drag this stuff around the screen. Dragging is something you can do in the web for the longest time, but it's like, hey, you know, we just need an up and down arrow, it's fine. So I felt like, and it turned out as we built it, that they did find a really great 80-20 situation where it was like, you know, it was cost effective. And so if you start to get into more front-end code, this is something important to think about, right? Like when you got that request response cycle, hey, refresh the page. It's like there's some inherent limits that kind of limit how crazy a client's request can be for a web page. But all of a sudden, you got React involved. It's like, okay, I want it to look super real time. Everything's changing. So that can get expensive. So I no longer had a heart attack at that point, so that was great. And so now we had to decide how to build this page editor. So in fact, with Webpacker, you actually have a bunch of different options. You know, you can use it just with plain JavaScript, and actually a few components on the system are just plain JavaScript, but they run through Webpacker. You can use Stimulus. I think that's the right logo. Is that right? Yeah, so you use Stimulus.js, which is a JavaScript framework released by Rails, by Basecamp. I haven't gotten a chance to play with it a lot. Dave has some cool resources on drifting Ruby to kind of learn about Stimulus, and hopefully get some good input later on kind of how that works out. You can use React, and you can use Vue.js as another popular front-end framework. I'll talk about that in a second. And all of these actually are available out of the box. Like you can pass a flag when you're creating a new Rails app and say, I want React, I want Vue. It'll get you a nice initial setup. It's that out of the box experience. Like a sample component is there ready to go when you run your application. You have what you need. You don't have to fiddle with configuration. So React is a front-end framework for building JavaScript. If you haven't heard of React, you've maybe been living under a rock. It's really big. If you're a millennial, you've definitely heard of React, almost certainly. You've probably heard that it was good. So I can't get past this one. It's years old now. It's so good. So React was what we ended up going with for this project. So this is a mostly back-end Rails team. They are wisely saying, which I think a lot of y'all might agree with, is like, hey, most of our needs Rails will getting this confused, so ironic. Most of our needs Rails will satisfy them. Most of our systems, like event registration forms, we don't need this big, flashy, expensive front-end thing. It's like Rails forms will do perfectly. So most of the stuff they work with and maintain is Rails. They want to be cost-effective. People's donated money. They want to be cost-effective with it. They had also already worked with React a little bit. Some of the vendors, the dev shops they work with, had like React portions of their apps. So they were familiar with it. React is really easy to hire for. It's ridiculously huge when it comes to the front end. And so finding a dev shop that could do React work for them, very easy to do. So the other option though is Vue, and I wanted to, another option, and I want to talk about Vue because I think Vue, I've already heard of some Rails developers getting into Vue.js, and I think it really fits with our sensibilities. It's my preferred front-end framework when I get to choose because Vue is very focused on conventions. The Vue core team, there's first-party components for things like routing between different pages, data management, a CLI for a build process. So if you like, Rails generate, it's like they got Vue generate and things like that, plugins to pull in really easily. Whereas if you play with React before, ironically, it's kind of like the Lego pirate robot, actually. React does one thing, and then you've got to pick and choose a bunch of things to assemble them together, not dissimilar to Node.js. So the React world does not share our values of standards and conventions. Vue does. And so the other thing that Vue is great for, and my friend Alex did a presentation on Vue at the meetup last night, it's a great progressive framework. And so you can drop it into an app. Sarah Drasner has a blog post talking about migrating from Jquery to Vue. And so it's easy enough to do. You can just add a script tag or add it to the asset pipeline. You can just drop Vue onto a few isolated pages. It's really well targeted for that. So between that, the fact that as a back-end developer, you can kind of gradually migrate towards Vue.js, and the fact that they have strong conventions, I highly recommend Vue in general and for Rails developers in particular. It's really good. But we didn't go with it in this case. We went with React. So let's take a look at the code to kind of see how it works and how to pull it up. I'm sure there could be plenty of questions. Any general questions about stuff before I get into the case study, the example itself? Let's take a look. So we wanted to make a sample website to work with. So we made a website for dogs. This is the church for dogs. You can see the dog. Oh, nope. I'm gonna switch the mirroring off, and we're gonna see, or the mirroring on. We're gonna see how that goes. So we got here's our church logo. This is one of our office dogs at Big Nerd Ranch. But you gotta have that full screen video. That's kind of essential these days. But yeah, so this is church for dogs. We got Badger there. We got a video, Digby and Alaska. Let's see if they'll play. So good. Who would want to visit that website? It's great. Cool. So this is on our dev server. This is the site actually running. It's got some cool responsive design stuff. Stuff wraps down for all them devices. It's good. Cool. But so this is the front end. It's not very interesting. It's all server rendered. Not a whole lot of JavaScript going on there. Here's the back end, the admin interface for it. And I'll zoom in a little bit. So you got navigation. You got pages. I'll come back to pages in a second. You got events. Our, got query parameters. Here's reloading the pages, nice and simple. Pull up an edit form. You clear something out. You submit that form. It's going to send it to the server. That's a thing that's okay to do in 2019. You can send the form to the server and do server validation. It's acceptable. So for most of the backend, this works just great. We got all these settings pages, right? We got just all these forms. Even a little bit of media upload. We get to use active storage to handle the uploads. So good. If you haven't got a chance to try active storage for handling your uploads, it was just seamless. Really, really great. So we got like a little media library in here. We got Jesus and Batman. That was the two sample files when we got this code. It's like, okay, cool, that's great. So this is all normal Rails up until this point. A little bit of JavaScript. We got some Jquery in there. We got Jquery and React. This is a very ecumenical situation going on here. But it's the page editor is the one main place in the app. There's a few others where we're using React. So if you pull up a page, let's do the kitchen sink. Should I zoom in a little bit more on the font size? Would that be a good idea? I'll zoom in a little bit more. We'll see if it fits at all. So this whole page here is now rendered by React. It's served out of Rails, but the page is rendered by React. We got some tabs here to get to kind of some settings for the web page. But then the editor here is the main Squarespace-inspired user interface. So as you're on here, you're hovering over these different components here, these different, we call them sections. So like one row is a section. If you go up in between them, you get this little line here where you say you can click on it to add a new section. So I'm gonna need to zoom out a bit so you can kind of see that. So when you add a section like this, you get some different options for what it can, don't click. You add a section, you get these different options for how you want to lay it out. You can have like a full width thing going on, 2 columns, you got like a grid on the right or a grid on the left, all these different kind of layout options that their designer specified. It's like these are the options we want to give the content editors. You can select the layout, and then when you click on it, you get this pop-up for these different types of content blocks. So they specify what they wanted to include, like you show an image, want to show a card, like so there's a card design that's common on the web these days, a card that represents some stuff. Let's do image first because it's pretty straightforward. So now you get another modal that pops up that lets you choose an image, and there could be a brand logo as well. So the image, you get this little pop-up here, this media library. This is one of the things when I first think CMS, it's like, oh, it's just forms, it's just CRUD. But then when it's like, oh, but like you can't just attach an image to one page, like it needs to be in a centralized library and options to like set metadata. And I was like, oh, okay, this is getting more complicated than I thought. So we'll do Batman, and we'll double Batman. We'll do the Batman brand logo as well. So when we save the block, we get double Batman. So really just to emphasize things. I'll do a card over here just to show you. You can see there's actually different options here. So the designer specified, depending on the size that they have, some like, this little kind of grid style, we don't want like an embedded form in here for you to submit your long amount of data. That's not gonna fit. But you can do a card. So card, you can choose some different card types. So like this gets at some of the custom things they were getting at, like these like church messages or message series. They wanted to connect into their system to do that. So we could just say, oh, give me the most recent message. You say a custom title, custom card, a title, all these different ways to kind of override stuff. You can link somewhere. You get a server error, that's good. But you can report a server error in a nice, friendly way. I rolled off the project now, so it's somebody else's problem now to fix that. But anyways, let's move away from that error message. So yeah, so this is all React. So this is running on the front end, and it actually works out well. Like we wanted this to be sort of like a work in progress. Like we don't want this data sent up to the server all at once. So this is all happening locally and stored just in memory in your browser. You can do save and publish. There's like a versioning thing. That's another one of the CMS complexities that's kind of nice when you have an off-the-shelf system that'll do it for you to save something as a new version. But if you want to save and publish, you can save and publish. And it goes up, and you click over here, it comes onto the front end. So something that's interesting to say is that, sorry about that. Frank, if you have recommendations on how to not buzz, that'd be great. So something that's interesting is, so on the front end here, this layout is all done, again, this comes down on the server side. You view source, it's like this is, well, I mean, there's a big mess of source because it's generated, but like, all these sections and divs and cells and stuff like that, that's coming down from the server. But on the admin screen here, this is all rendered by React. And so if you use React Dev Tools, and if you zoom in because it's super, super small, whether you've used React or not before, these are dev tools that let you see your thing. And so you can see, okay, well, that's way off the edge. But you can see like there's these different React components. This is a page editor React component. It's got a page in it. There's a page header. So that's a React component. So this is React being done in the normal React way within our Rails application. And so we have a weird, I didn't plan to confess this here, but we have a really weird thing that's happening where our Rails app is rendering our React page editor, but then each of these blocks is calling back into Rails to render the block and send it back. The There's even one of those where Rails will send back another React app within that React app. Don't publish this online. This would be terrible. Like, don't let them know that I confessed this. But the idea was, this is something where we wanted to make sure that this page editor was as accurate to the front end as possible. So we didn't want to duplicate the logic to render out what each of these blocks was going to be. So on the front end, we say, like, you know, the layout of the whole screen as well as the rendering of each block, it's just separate partials. And then for the page editor, each individual block makes a separate request back to the server, and the same partial is used. It just renders out that individual block and gives it back, but it puts it into these different pieces within React so that React can move stuff around. We can swap stuff, we can change the order of stuff, we can click on things to edit them, and things like that. So that's what we build. We really like it, and we felt like it worked well. What's your question?
So just to cover everything here, is the front end like Ajaxing and getting back essentially scripts to run?
When you say the front end, they use the terms front end and back end kind of weird. So to make sure, you're referring to the React app here?
The React app, is it making an Ajax call, getting back a bunch of like the string for some JavaScript, and that's what you're saying they're executing, or they're like the thing you said a second ago?
I will show you that, because this is more on the outside before we get into things here. So when we are on the page, like, we'll get into how the core of Webpacker, when Webpacker serves up JavaScript in just a minute when we look under the hood at the code. But as far as like my weird confession about our architecture here, so when the React app is running, it will make Ajax requests back to the server for the blocks. And so let me reload the page and show you one of those, or a bunch of those. So in these Ajax requests that happen, and remember, this is the admin side, so performance here is not too important. As long as it's not killing the server with load, we're fine. So there's these calls to this blocks endpoint here. We're posting because we're creating, because this is resources. But I'm saying each block has some configuration. And so I say, okay, here's the configuration for my video block. I want, it's from Vimeo, here's the ID. This is all the stuff that comes up in the editor when I pull it up in there. And so this is all transient data. This might not ever have been saved to the server. But so I say, hey, post here, give me the individual block when I send you this config. And when I get back, I'm glad you asked that question because it's a great way to visualize it. I get back just the fragment of HTML for that block. So it's just a div on the outside. And then React will just inject that into the React app to display it. Is that a helpful summary? Cool. But yeah, so the client was really satisfied with this user interface. They found it, they had to build out the content for these sites really, really quick because they were, they wanted to release within 6, 7 months we were on the project. But like they didn't want us to be code complete and then cool, like now we're gonna start entering content. Like they were, we were laying the track as the project was moving forward and stuff like that. But it worked for them to be able to lay these things out, to be able to visualize the information as they went, to be able to see, like they were doing an iterative approach where they were like, okay, what do we want this page to look like? We want double Batmans over here. Okay, now that I see double Batman, I know that it's good. I want to stick with it, and stuff like that. So cool, so that's what the thing is. So now we're gonna look under the hood to see how does Webpacker hook these things up and how do these things work. Questions about this before I get into the implementation? Go ahead.
I have one quick one, and tell me if this is getting too down to me, but how are you guys making that HTML get back to the server and putting it in React?
There's a method. You might be getting at this if you know React. We dangerously set inner HTML. Oh yeah. This is really funny. This is an interesting API design decision on React's point. They were like, okay, we want you to be able to, we know you may need to set the inner HTML on your components. Just like, but it's kind of dangerous. Like we kind of want to discourage you from doing it. So the name of the attribute that you pass for that is dangerously set inner HTML. So like, they just want you to know that you're taking your life in your hands when you do this. And so we did a little research in code review to make sure that we were okay with dangerously setting inner HTML. We played around with some iframe stuff as well, interestingly. We could talk about that afterwards if you want. That was part of my crazy architecture of iframes within React apps, within Rails that called to other Rails pages that had other React apps. Anyways, I'm not saying all these decisions were good decisions. This is just a case study. Go ahead. Say again? In this case, we're using Redux. I can mention some of this a little bit in passing when we see it. Redux is, if y'all aren't familiar, it's one of the kind of state management libraries within the React ecosystem. It's a very popular one. And so really with our decisions here, we went with kind of like a Rails-like philosophy of like, what are the most broadly adopted tools and libraries in the React ecosystem? Because these folks, again, aren't gonna be in React every day. So we want the tools that we give them to deliver to the client to be the ones that they're going to find the most Stack Overflow posts on. They can most easily find books on, find other dev shops to help with. So we wanted to kind of stick with the most broadly adopted things out there. So we went with Redux, and I think for a little bit, I started out, I was like, well, you know, let's see, it's just one page. Maybe we don't need this state management library. So we started out with just like passing state between components. But even for this, like this is a complex enough one page that we found that Redux was useful. Yeah, cool. We're not gonna get too much into the details of that. Mostly, again, we're gonna see, you know, I'm happy to talk about any of this stuff afterwards, but like mostly we're gonna show how Rails passes over to React and to Webpacker and back. So let's dive into the code now. I have it in Visual Studio Code here mainly just so I can zoom stuff in. So this is our Rails app. Looks pretty standard. Got our gem file, got our app directory and stuff like that. So when you have an application with Webpacker, you're going to get an app JavaScript folder. It's singular, unlike the famous app assets JavaScripts. That's so entertaining from years and years ago. You also have an app JavaScript. So again, the idea is, and in our case, you know, this is not Rails 6, so we are still using the asset pipeline for some JavaScript, some jQuery-ish stuff. So we got some jQuery, you know, we got some sprinkles of JavaScript on these pages, all these pages that are just normal Rails pages done in the normal Rails way. But over in app JavaScript, so let's take a look at what we have in here. So when you have an app that has Webpacker, in here, there's a packs folder. And so what packs are is like, these are like your starting points. It's kind of like mini JavaScript applications within your Rails application. And so in our case here, yeah, what is, he renamed it? Edit page view. So I think it's just accidental that these have two different file extensions, so you can ignore that. The idea is that every file in here is like a mini JavaScript application you can drop into a different page. So edit page view is the name of our page editor. And so this one here is available. This is kind of some normal React setup stuff that we don't need to get into too much, but this is just kind of a normal JavaScript React file, but it's in our packs directory as edit page view. And so each pack is available for you from within your template partials to be able to drop into a page. So I didn't look up where this was in advance. Let me see if I can find out where it is. We got our views, got our admin views. It's under pages, and it's edit. So kind of the typical place you'd expect for an edit page partial to be. And it's a very sparse one, because we have an inline style here for some reason. I didn't catch that in code review, oops. Doesn't hurt anything. But all we have in this page is we have a div called edit page view, and then we have a JavaScript pack tag. So whereas, and again, y'all may know more about the edge cases of different ways to use the asset pipeline, but in general, it seems like a common way to do that is like all of your assets kind of go in one place. You get all your CSS, it's there, it's available for the whole website. I know there's a way to like, you know, set some up, there's a convention like controller by controller, maybe you have specific controller styles or JavaScript. But in general, it's like, hey, you got your asset pipeline stuff for your whole website. By contrast, you know, with the setup of the way things work here in Webpacker, I say, hey, on this particular partial, I want to include the JavaScript pack tag for edit page view. And this is the name of the file. So like by having this file here, Webpacker knows to go into app JavaScript packs edit page view, and it looks, you know, it knows that there's going to be a JavaScript-ish extension there, and it knows to include the relevant JavaScript. So let's just view source, just so you know that's not, you know, you can see what's going on there as you need to. I got my development mode, all my script tags up at the top there from asset pipeline, but in the page, you know, down in the page I've got my div rendered out, and I got my script for the edit page view pack. And we can see we've got like fingerprinting and stuff like that to break the cache and things like that. But yeah, so it's just writing out the script tag. So Webpacker is compiling a bunch of this stuff together and giving us a script that we can drop in to run this React app. In the case of React, the conventional way to set things up is you're just doing, well, it looks like we got like a DOM content loaded thing to wait until everything's done. But in React, to kick off a React app, you've got this React DOM.render. You find an element on the page you're going to stick it into, and then you start using this crazy React JSX syntax to put React components onto there. But the point is, really what we've done is we have this div with an ID of edit page view. This is where we want to stick our React app, and it's actually going to cover the whole page in our case. But it doesn't have to. You can have just like one thing within the page be a React app as well. But so we find our edit page view element, just with regular document query selector, and then we pass that off into React land for the normal React way to do stuff. And so what Webpacker is going to do, as this edit page view container is kind of like our main component that everything lives under, that's just imported in the normal JavaScript way. And if we were to dig into there, we can kind of see, okay, what is it? This is like kind of React setup stuff. There's our Redux connections there and set up in a normal way. But so we say, just at a very light level, what is this edit page view container? Well, we can open it up. This is Visual Studio Code, so I bet I can command click. Yeah. So this is a lot of imports because stuff in JavaScript is pretty explicit compared to in Ruby. So we got to import all of our things that we're using here. So we import them. We got some Redux stuff going on. But at this point, so again, this is not going to be super familiar. Like this is not going to be super obvious if you've never touched React before. React is a very different paradigm. So if you find you want to get into it, you want to use it like, there's a learning process. But the good thing is, this is all the normal React way to do things. So if you're reading React tutorials online, and like, hey, build a React app, and here's a tool you can use to build it, it drops into Webpacker in exactly the same way. And so that's the nice thing about it is that you can benefit from all these tutorials, all these tools, like new tooling, new NPM packages that come out. They drop in right away. We don't need to wait for sprockets to be updated to handle these new features. So we're kind of freed up to use the latest and greatest in the JavaScript world and to decide if it's a good idea or not to do that. But, so again, you can get to an very overwhelming state getting into React stuff. This is kind of new. This is a learning process. This is why the team is wanting to kind of dig into React to really learn it so they can maintain it well. But the key point here is that we have now gone over into normal React land, and there's nothing Rails specific. There's nothing Webpacker specific. You can just write your JavaScript exactly like anywhere you've learned React. Or if you're doing just non-React specific JavaScript, you can write it in here as well. One kind of like folder layout thing to be aware of, and this is probably all I'll say in this section is, I mentioned that in app JavaScript packs, this is the case where it's like Rails conventions apply, and they say, hey, any file in here is available as a pack to put on the page using the pack tag. From here, it's often the case to go up a level to other folders within JavaScript, like create other folders for your apps. So in our case, the pattern we followed was, we've got an edit page view pack, we're gonna have an edit page view folder as well, and that's where all the rest of the our React application goes. So there's a lot. There's a lot of components, there's a lot of richness to it. We get to do some fun stuff in here where we have, for those different blocks, each of those different block types, like I want an FAQ, I want a card, I want a Google map. It's just kind of one separate component for each of those, and so we can kind of build out a nice simple form for each one. And so like React and these other front-end frameworks compose really nicely, this kind of component-based thing. Frank, what am I doing? Something wrong? So right by a big magnet. Is that good? Would you set it on here, you think?
Yeah, sit there. The receiver's right behind you.
Cool.
So line of sight's good. You can totally do that too.
I'm going to pull it off the side, I'm sure. I'm just going to do this.
Do you want to put in your sweatshirt pocket?
That's a good idea. Let's do that. Got my little antenna sticking out. That's good. Cool. But yeah, so like that's like when you're looking at the structure of a Webpacker app, like you're going to see those packs in here, and you know those are your entry points. I think that's actually the term that Webpack uses, is entry points. And then other files, I mean, you're going to be able to see from import statements where stuff comes from, but a lot of times you'll have these other folders within JavaScript that your other JavaScript lives in. So that gets us over from Rails world into React world, or into other JavaScript world. Yeah, cool. Sounds good. So then the question comes into, like, then you can do whatever you want to in a front-end app and a JavaScript app. So the question is, like, and how are we getting back over into the Rails world to read data and to send data back? So we're just doing normal AJAX requests. You can use these with, like the browser has this fetch API you might have used. There's a JavaScript library called Axios that's pretty common to use for AJAX requests, web service requests, because it provides some niceties. And so you can do those. And like I said, React doesn't have conventions, so like you got to decide how you're going to set up your React app. So that part's not fun. Use Vue.js. But if you're using a React app, at some point in your code, you're going to be kind of kicking off these web service requests. So let me see if I can see that in the console here. And this is like what we recommended to the client developer who joined our project. It's like, hey, as you're trying to get oriented, use the web developer tools. You'll see whatever's happening in React world, you'll see the inputs and the outputs coming in and out. So if we look in the XHR requests here for the page, we can see that we're doing a GET request to API, good old API v1, pages 32. So we're on page 32. That's the page we loaded. And we're doing this AJAX request to load page 32. And then the response is just JSON, just like you'd expect. Yeah. We're looking at performance now. What do we do? I don't know. I don't know what I've done. Oh, I see. So yeah, so we get a big old mess of JSON that's come down with all of our data that we mess with all of our content with our sections that have our blocks and stuff like that. So Rails communicates this whole setup to us. Incidentally, in our case, we actually stored this, like we have different models for pages and page versions. We actually used a Postgres JSON B column to store the page content. Because we were like, we could have broken it up into separate models, but we figured because we're reading and writing it atomically, it's like, hey server, give me the whole page configuration. So I'll use a JSON B column on Postgres. And like, oh, we're writing it all back atomically as well. And so this is the first time I played with JSON B columns in Postgres. They work really well. There are some edge cases. I think we might be having a blog post coming out about that that we can share on the group or things like that. But basically at this point, like, when your React application is running, you're communicating back with the server using web service requests in a very typical way. And these are just typical API endpoints that are just reading models, rendering out JSON, however you prefer to do that from within Rails. Go ahead.
So why do you need an instance in your view?
A what?
In your view, you showed earlier on when you showed the view, you had an instance in your view.
You're talking about the Rails code or the? Okay. Oh yeah, let me pull that up. Yeah. Oh yeah. I think so. This was one mechanism that we had to pass the data over, because this is a standalone JavaScript file that doesn't know what page you're on or whatever. So we wanted a way to pass the ID of the page we were on so that it would know which ID to request from the server side. And we could have gotten it from the window location as well, but like explicitly passing it as a data attribute to the div here is what allows us to do that. And we read that off in the normal way. Like this, I think the other consultancy that was working on us before this set up this convention, and we really loved it. So once you find that element, we can use element.dataset to read attributes off of it. So like we read that on, this is where we fetch the page, yeah. So this was a thing that we do to kind of fetch the page, download the page data. You can also do stuff, y'all may have played with this for other kind of like JavaScript approaches. You can like serialize JSON data to the page when it comes down. And so if you've got like a JavaScript app going on, but like when the server renders the page, you've got your JSON there, it just saves you an extra request. But again, because in our case, like the performance on the admin side was not very intensive, so we were good with kind of just, kick off an AJAX request, we were good to go. The thing I'll say about this is that, so like, there's another thing with that Redux library that I was talking about that handles sort of centralized data storage in a React app. Like, there's lots of different ways to do it. And it's common to have these AJAX requests kicked off, because it's like your data layer. And so those AJAX requests get kicked off from within there. So that's something where like there's not a conventional way, and depending on how you build React or you build Vue, you'll do those at different places. But when you're thinking about what's the handoff, like what's the handoff between Rails and Webpacker, your front-end app, and then back to Rails, it's that JavaScript pack tag to get over into JavaScript world. And then it's just AJAX requests in whatever way you want to do it to get back to the server side. And I'll show you just so you can kind of get your head around it. That API controller is exactly what you would expect, other than these weird Visual Studio code lines. So we got pages, show me the page. I mean, this is, you're loading the page data, you're rendering it as JSON using some active model serializers or whatever approach you want. So this is all the normal web service endpoints you'd expect. I think those are the main things about the handoff between Rails and React and back that I wanted to talk about. So let me check the slides and see. I said to the code. Yeah. Oh, so let's talk about this quick, and I will just do it this way. So I had done Rails, and then separately, like independently, I had like learned about React. And there's different ways to set these things up. Like, has anyone ever built like a Rails app that's only an API with no front end? Just JSON API? And then have you had like a separate JavaScript application that runs totally independently that's consuming that data? Yeah, so you can totally do that as well. In that case, you wouldn't need Webpacker. Like you just build React or Vue in whatever way you want. You host it on S3 or whatever. So Webpacker really works when you want to host this JavaScript application within your Rails app. So I learned JavaScript and React independently. And like I said, Webpack is famous for having super impenetrable config files. And so one of the appeals and one of the advertised points of Webpacker is you don't need to mess with that. Like it works out of the box. Like all your features are there, just pass that React flag, that view flag to get things working, and you're good to go. And I found that that worked out exactly. We never needed to think about our Webpack configuration. I was able to write React exactly the same way I was in any other environment without needing to touch it. Now, you can get to the Webpack config if you find that you need some kind of advanced feature to customize it. But again, like generally as Rails developers, we believe that your front-end app also is not a unique, beautiful snowflake. Like, probably you don't need to rewrite your Webpack config from scratch. Probably you'll be fine. So that definitely played out, and so I would recommend that. Like, I did not find any limitations of any substance in using Webpacker in that way. I was able to code React exactly like normal, where the code was all the same, with all the same complexities of React. I also found that local development and production deployment were both seamless. So locally, it seemed like this was not the case right when Webpacker came out, but locally, when I just started up a Rails server, we were running through Foreman, so like other stuff was running as well. But the front-end build process came up. So if I was going through, if I save a JavaScript file, it would actually auto-reload the page if we were on a page that was doing it. And it was built and we were good to go. When we built for production, it would compile down our Webpack assets as well as our asset pipeline assets. And so those were all just there, just JavaScript files served out of the public folder in production. So that all just worked seamless. I never had to think about it in the whole project. It just worked really, really great. So that's about it. I will say one other thing that I found as I was researching is a gem called React Rails. I think this predates Webpacker. Has anyone used React Rails? Yeah, a few of them. Am I right that it predates Webpacker? Yeah. So this was another way to use React Rails, and now it can be used either with or without Webpacker. It's kind of like a different level of abstraction from what I can tell. We didn't try it out because Webpacker out of the box worked fine for us. But so when you're using React Rails, you can do Rails G React component. Feels very comfortable, very familiar. That's kind of nice. You also use a React component helper to embed it into a page. And so it feels like, whereas like there was a little bit of boilerplate involved in the code I showed you, like we got to do react dom.render. Like we got to find the element on the page that we pull stuff from. Whereas if you're using React Rails, it's like, hey, I'll put the React component right here. Just like, I just want this component. This is a JavaScript file, just put the thing right here, and it'll do it for you. So I think if you found, I mean, there could be lots of other pros and cons. I'd be interested to hear from y'all as we talk in just a moment. But like, especially if you have like a bunch of, you got a server-rendered site, and you got React components everywhere. They're just all interspersed. This could be a really nice way to do it, because you just say, give me this React component, I'm good to go. So React Rails gem, I definitely recommend checking it out as well if you're playing with things. It's easy to drop in and get started. This is not a presentation to teach you React. I was overwhelmed even just describing React to you and showing you these big JavaScript files. So that is not one of the outcomes, but I hope this has been helpful to describe a bit and show a bit of what Webpacker is used for, when you might want to pull for it. Just the fact that we can get an app that was 95% just stock Rails the way we've been writing it for years, and that was exactly what we needed. And yet for that one page, that one Squarespace page, it gave us this real richness. Being able to have a really responsive front-end app. We used React. You want to use another framework, Stimulus, Vue, plain old JavaScript. Those are all great options. But as I mentioned before, we get the options of this latest and greatest stuff that's happening in the JavaScript world, and we can reach for that and have that running and have our cake and eat it too. We can have our Rails cake as well. So cool. That is an intro to Webpacker. Let's get into questions. What questions do you have about this project, or any of the details I showed you, or about Webpacker in general? Or what experiences have you had to share? Go ahead, Calvin.
Did you not have to run Webpack dev server, or did you have?
I did not. Now, I am doubting myself now. That might have been in our Foreman file, so let me see if they set that up before us. Okay.
Webpack dev server, if you don't need the live reloading, but the next version.
I was getting live reloading, and so I'm not sure how.
You get live reloading, but it'll kick off a thread inside of your build process, which means it takes forever. So like, it's nicer to have it separately because it runs really fast. Yeah. But otherwise, you're gonna be like, hey, my page is loading, and you go and see this compiling for the next 20 seconds.
Oh. Ours is thankfully faster than that, so that's good. I'm gonna, while we're discussing other things, I'm gonna see if I can find that in the README here. Webpack, yeah, that was a not a pain point, but that was just a thing when Webpacker first came out and I tried it. It was like, oh, I have to run two things. Like, I love how I usually just run one thing, just Rails S. So that was a bit different. But yeah, let's see here. Dev server. If you have enough JavaScript that on-demand compilation is too slow, you'll need to run Webpack dev server. This is saying it compiles on demand rather than upfront by default. So that was fast enough for us. So. That is a great question. Thank you for asking that. So adding packages works the same. That's another thing that works the same way that I'm totally used to in the JavaScript front-end world. This is an interesting point. Like, thinking about, I'm coming at this from the perspective, I knew some Rails, a couple years of Rails, knew a couple years of kind of the latest JavaScript front-end stuff, and so having both of those bits of knowledge coming together, I was like, oh yeah, Webpacker just lets me use both. If you're coming from not having played with a lot of that latest JavaScript stuff, there's going to be a learning curve. And so just know that, plan for it, decide if and when is the right time to do that. But so that being said, in your Rails app, you're going to have a package JSON file at the root of your app. So this is the node, the npm equivalent of a gem file. So it just lists out all your dependencies with their versions, and those are all in there. And so there's, like, in the front-end world, if you haven't seen it, npm is like the official package manager client. Well, so I try to explain this. npm is the registry, like rubygems.org. npm is also the official front-end client, equivalent to, I'm getting my brain around it, gem or bundler or both. It's kind of like both. But there's alternatives as well. Yarn is a really popular front-end, a package manager client. I like to use Yarn. So, like, let me see if I mentioned that in the README. Yarn tests, yeah, you can run commands through it. But yeah, basically npm install is the command if you're using the npm client to pull down a package, or yarn install is the alternative if you're using Yarn. So that is another thing that happens just the way it does in the rest of front-end development. And these packages here, it installs it into that famous node modules folder that's like gigabytes and is like heavier than a black hole and stuff like that. But that's where it puts it. And Webpacker knows that that stuff is there and it can pull in those dependencies. So in your code, when you say import React from React, that just means you got React in here, in your package JSON file. It's available to be imported from to use that way. Cool. Good question, thanks. Other questions about any of these things?
So one of the interesting kind of things I run into is that, so whenever you make a different pack, right, so you end up essentially importing that pack somewhere in your HTML, right? It's just like an application.js, which normally you would put in your sort of top-level application HTML. So I was like, oh, I should break this up and have like a different pack for all the things. And I was like, wait, should I like put this on, like, should I put this in the pages that I need it, like the places where I need it, and now I'm like doing additional requests to, say, here's my additional request for this JavaScript file that built the pack. Or should I put it globally, like the way that Rails does it, where it just puts everything into one file and just load it all at once on every page and relies on a cache? Like, I've not run into a good best practice around it. It seems like most people, from what I'm learning, are putting you just like the pack tag on that one page, and then they're just waiting for it to load when it comes out. I don't know if I'm explaining that question correctly, but do you understand what I'm talking about?
I do understand what you're talking about, yeah. I also don't know what the standard is. In our case, it was pretty clear for that page editor example I showed, because like there's just literally one page on the site that has that application, and on that page, the whole page is that application. There is no header or anything. And so for us, it was very clear there. We have some other packs you saw, so it was a bit different there. I've felt the same way in like pre-Webpacker front-end stuff, where it's like, do I break things up controller by controller? Jquery will just, fail silently if it doesn't find the thing you're querying for. So you can put all your Jquery in there and load it up at once. And so I've gone back and forth on different projects I've been on. Like, do I want to optimize it to minimize how much JavaScript is downloaded on that first page? Or do I want, but then I have like the development overhead of putting it in different places. And then each page that I go to is more requests versus like, let's just get it down in one chunk. And then every page I go to is going to be faster. The JavaScript is going to be ready right away. So that, I'm familiar with that trade-off already, and so I feel no more conflicted than I already did, but also no more answers than I already had. Anybody else have opinions on that for asset pipeline or for within Webpacker, of whether you put everything globally or not? Yeah.
If you have 10 different components on the same page, you're requesting 10 different JavaScript files separately for each component, then it's going to all be served over a single connection.
I've heard mixed views about H2 and the performance of it over the years, so I'm curious. And also, I knew that like some folks a year or two ago were working on getting it into Rack. So, is your experience in like, have you experienced that good performance in like Rails in particular?
I've not seen any issues with it.
Cool. Ooh. Here's a microphone. Yeah? That's awesome.
As a security researcher, I love it when everyone puts everything in one file. It tells me lots of stuff about their admin. Yeah, my admin, otherwise I have access to. Or I do because they get access to it. So
That at least would be one thing to separate out.
yeah. So I just wanted to throw it out there for people who are like, oh, throw it all in. But your hacker likes you for that.
Your hacker will thank you.
Yes.
Go ahead.
My answer is actually based on my question, which is whether you had to fight turbo links in order to do this JavaScript stuff. And the way that it's related to the answer is because if you put everything in the head, then you get that turbo links kind of cache benefit when you're changing pages. So that would incentivize you to try to load everything in the head once so that you're not loading that JavaScript tag on the body with sometimes turbo links replacing the page.
Yeah.
So that I could see if you were using both of those technologies together, that you would want to combine it all in the same place.
Yeah.
But I could also see just lots of cases where there's some NPM package that just doesn't expect turbo links to be intercepting page loads, doing its JSON theme magic.
Yeah.
So did you have to fight with any of that stuff in your React app?
We did not need to fight with turbo links, no. I'm not actually 100% sure if we turned it off. I kind of want to check and see now if we did. Because again, there was another consultancy that started out the app, and so where would I see? I guess I would view source on the page, right? If nothing else. Oh yeah. Those were removed entirely.
You can see the default was left in the application that HTML. There will be like some turbo link stuff in there.
So yeah, it looks like we are not using turbo links. Aside from that, like I definitely don't want to say like, oh, I know for sure that all these JavaScript things are fine with turbo links or whatever. I think, whereas like in the React world in particular, and some of this JavaScript stuff, the approach of unobtrusive JavaScript, of progressive enhancement, is not so much the thing. And so the typical thing to do, and there's downsides to that for sure. A typical thing to do in React in particular is to explicitly hook in here. So like I think we're doing DOM content loaded, so if you had turbo links, you would do whatever turbo links thing it is that you're connecting into there. But like React is like, hey, just tell me when you're ready for me to render, and I'm good to go. Like that's the way React wants to do it. And so within there, everything's being hooked up. And so like, you know, using React or other front-end frameworks, you know, you're generally not looking for whether, you know, DOM elements are already on the page. Like it's creating that universe from scratch for you. And so I feel like, you know, once you're in this Webpacker world, like probably they'd be less likely to conflict with that because they're not making any assumptions about whether your page is loaded or not loaded or things like that. Of course, you're transitioning around different pages. Things could get weird. Like, you never know when things are going to come up. But like, it doesn't seem like the setup in the React world is like automatically going to cause any problems with turbo links. So that is my guess. Did that get at what kind of the question you were asking? Yeah. I think I know somebody else here that's also disappointed. Go ahead.
I was curious if there are any notable gotchas of moving from asset pipeline to Webpacker. I feel like that's qualified.
Yeah, I think, so this is a greenfield application, so we were not at all like migrating existing code over into it. In fact, like we specifically left JavaScript, like, you know, our, you know, JavaScript sprinkles, we left in the asset pipeline. So if you create a new Rails 6 apps out of the box, like that's not going to be an option there. So like I don't have a case study here for migrating things or for running everything within Webpack. So that will be one of y'all that maybe can share at a future month or something like that. Or maybe two of y'all right now. Go ahead.
I know you put it out there that you didn't have any issues with your production deployment, and so that sounds to me like it solved an issue that you may have already had with other solutions, so that there was something you were anticipating. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Oh yeah, thanks for asking that. I thought you might have had something to say about his question. So let me pause for just a second. Let me see if, get my brain back around to that because I'm low on caffeine. Yeah, so it's like, I think the interesting thing about Webpacker is the mental model is different because, I mean, well, the things like JavaScript imports and stuff like that, like that's very different than just JavaScript files that are assembled together from that manifest file. So it's like, it doesn't at all, it seems like very, very substantial to migrate files over. Dave, do you have any ideas, thoughts on that?
Yeah, so in Rails 6, things really changed because you no longer have an app assets JavaScript folder.
Yeah.
It is all in Webpacker. So if you have a gem, so like the Cocoon gem for nested forms, you can't really just use that anymore because it has its own JavaScript files that you need to include in the JavaScript under the app assets, but that's no longer there in Rails 6. So there's a lot of different kind of workarounds that you can do to still get that same kind of functionality to use those older gems. But then you have libraries like Bootstrap, and just adding Bootstrap into your application. In Webpacker, it's really strange because you have your application.js file, but then you're importing in the CSS assets into that application.js file. It just seems very counterintuitive from that standpoint. And then you have to add a style sheet tag into your application layout and reference that application.js. So it'll pull in and compile the JavaScript assets. That's done from a different compiler than Webpacker.
Yeah, so did you have a thought on that question?
It's a similar topic. Is the
Well, if it's a change of topic, he had a question. I just want to see if you had anything on his question. All right, I'm getting a queue ready, so we're going to get there, that background job. So your question was like, was I anticipating build issues going to production issues? Yeah, I think it was not mainly that I was anticipating problems, but I think, yeah, I guess outside of the Rails ecosystem, it's like you kind of just got to do that stuff yourself. And so like, given that it was JavaScript, I was like, okay, even the fact that there's that separate Webpack dev server, it was like, do I need to run another command? We are deploying through Heroku, and so that's nice. And so I'm sure there's all kinds of magic that's set up there that really helps us out because Heroku's amazing. But yeah, like I think just I mean, in general, like, I mean, this is good, like, I'm sure you'll run into edge cases, like, I mean, there edge cases come up, but it's like, because we were really staying on the shiny path of Rails, our needs are just a very basic Rails application, and now that, like, Webpacker is an option available within Rails, like, well, our needs were very basic Webpacker options. And so, again, I also have limited info in that, like, you know, we weren't on from the very start of the project, so if there were bumps, maybe the other dev shop kind of got into those to see, and we got the benefits of that. But yeah, there was not something that I had to think about on every deployment. We did not run into issues later as I mean, they had added a little bit of basic React, but as we added more and more, it wasn't something where it like blew up and we had to like set up a new type of build approach or anything like that. Like things felt as smooth as they do with the asset pipeline for us. Yeah. Okay, so now you're next and you had another question.
Well, for me, and it sounds stupid, it hit me like several times at the start, the notion that, like, so let's say you can use CSS modules in the React land, right? So you can sort of import your CSS in your pack tags. Well, that ends up creating a JavaScript pack and a style sheet pack. And if you don't put both, it doesn't work. I just assumed that like the freeloader would have this one file, but the default option is the webpacker.yaml says extract CSS true, and you actually get to put both. And so, like, even if you make a style sheet pack tag, you still have to have both to get into a curtain, which is weird to have a JavaScript pack tag called style sheet. But
yeah,
it has almost nothing in it, but you have to have both.
Gotcha. Yeah, and actually, this is a good point. So we did not end up using this. We, I don't know, I kind of made a lazy decision when we started. It's like, well, you know, let's just keep all of our CSS over in the asset pipeline. Like, that's fine. To some degree, some of it like was going to be shared anyways because we wanted, again, because we wanted the admin here to show up as much like the front end to be as faithful a preview of the front end as possible. Like the CSS within these blocks, within these, these content blocks is shared. And so because that was all going to be in the asset pipeline anyways, I was like, well, you know, this sidebar, this header, like the styles for this modal, like, let's just put all that in Sprockets as well. Because it's, you know, React and these other front-end frameworks, in the end, ultimately, like, they just stick DOM into your page. So the CSS, the global CSS that you have is still applied to that in just the normal way. And you can do, Webpack-based CSS approaches where, yeah, it's scoped to certain things or imported or, you know, in an approach like that, if you've got a big library like Bootstrap, you just import the pieces you need and then it'll only build those pieces. I forgot to say, that was one of the big things that Webpack became really famous for was, there's a couple different terms, but dead code elimination, or tree shaking is a term. And I've heard some people bite shed whether that's the same as dead code elimination. But basically the idea is, because all these imports are explicit in JavaScript, it knows what you're pulling in and what you're not. If there's like a bunch of other things in React Redux, but I'm only pulling in provider, and I guess there's other things, whatever. Like, it's only gonna include those functions, those objects. Like there's, in that sense, as dynamic as JavaScript is, these imports are kind of static. And so Webpack and other tools are able to look at them statically at build time to know what's needed, and so they can like exclude stuff that's not needed and things like that. That's why you don't, in Webpack world, you don't need like the full version of the library JavaScript file, and then like the minimal version of the library JavaScript file, and then like the 17 other Bootstrap JavaScript files, and you just choose the ones you need. It's like, well, no, you import Bootstrap. Well, I don't know about Bootstrap, but like you import the equivalent, you pull in the functions or the exported classes, objects, whatever that you need, and the build tool knows just the minimum that's needed. And as front-end JavaScript apps get bigger and bigger, like we need to strip out the unused stuff to make sure they don't become 40 megabytes, 100 megabytes, and it's just the same thing as a mobile application being downloaded. That's not where we want to be. It's not going to help anyone. I will say, when you want to get into that, to get a sense of, yeah, because especially if you are pulling in, like importing CSS, stuff like that, you can import images as well, which again is really just telling Webpacker, there's a dependency here. We need this CSS file, we need this image. The Webpack website, if I didn't make it clear before, Webpack is the standalone JavaScript tool. Webpacker is the wrapper in Rails that pulls it in. So if you go to the Webpack page, there's documentation that will kind of guide you through it, and you can kind of see like, okay, well, what is an endpoint? Okay, how do you just set things up? This is the tutorial that's going to walk you through building your super complicated Webpack config file to make things longer and longer. So like all the details of that you won't need, but if you go through the Webpack tutorials to see how you, like, where would that be? Multiple entry points, modules, I wonder, somewhere in here, I guess importing CSS would probably be a thing. I don't know where it is, but it's in there somewhere. So yeah, so like one thing, in addition to learning React or whatever, learning some about Webpack, even though you won't need to reach for all of the configuration, but understanding the concepts of how it works, like that's going to help you know why you can, the fact that you can import CSS, the fact that you would need a style sheet tag and stuff like that. So yeah, so that's why we didn't use it, is because we were just building our style sheets in the normal, traditional way. Frank.
If other team members or market reasons have been tried this with React, would you have personally gone with Vue if you just didn't have the same feature, would you have gone with Vue?
I mean, from a personal standpoint, I would have gone with Vue, for sure. I also had experience with it. I got to do like 9 or so months of a big Vue app at a big enterprise client, and so I got a lot of experience with it, so I could have brought that to bear. But like I would have, like any of us, well, hopefully all of us, but like especially those of us that are consultants, like we want to think about like for the company, what's going to be best for this company. So like there was even if they had not asked for React or had already used it, like thinking about their hiring needs, I guess that might have been one of the main ones. But I mean, I would have, given that they were already wanting React, like I think I mentioned that like there were some pros to Vue, but I agree with them that React seemed like a good choice for them. But if they were saying, hey, which would you recommend, I probably would have made a case for Vue. Yeah. Other thoughts, questions, experiences with Webpacker? Go ahead.
Did you ever find yourself confused by being in a JavaScript module and not having access to local variables like window or document to do something inside of the React?
I'm now wondering how this happened. I was actually confused by the opposite, interestingly, where because in the same way that like the apps are, I'm sorry, I'm moving around here so you can see me. In the same way that the app just drops DOM elements onto the page, and so they're available there to be styled. Like when you have, like we had, like Jquery just imported into the site, and so $sign was just there. Like that at runtime, that is still available. And so we had some places where we were, like with Moment, we just typed in Moment for Moment.js without thinking. It's like, oh, it works. Wait, why does it work? I didn't import it. And so I did, like ESLint did give me the squiggly. So ESLint, if you haven't used it, it's a linter that kind of warns you about JavaScript errors or unused variables, stuff like that. But it was giving me a squiggly that was like, hey, Moment is not imported here and stuff like that. But apparently, Webpacker built it regardless. And so that happened. So there were some cases, and I wrote this up afterwards and kind of handoff notes to the client to make sure they understood. Because, and this is probably something you could maybe optimize, like if you were in a Rails 6 world where everything was going through the front end, nothing was going through the asset pipeline for your JavaScript, then this would be different. But so with our setup, where we are still using the asset pipeline for our JavaScript sprinkles, we do still have We actually have coffee Rails, didn't remove that. That's funny. We still have jQuery Rails. We still have Bootstrap. I see Bootsnap, but Bootstrap. Oh, no, that's right. They use Foundation, which at the time I thought was big, but now I know that everybody uses material design these days. It's like Google stuff. But yeah, so like we got Foundation coming in. It requires jQuery. So those are available in the normal public ways there. But for some of these libraries that we needed to make available in React, I actually added them also in the package JSON. Again, this is something where if this stuff was running on the front end, I would have thought a bit about like duplicate JavaScript, like, well, that's not efficient. But because it was the admin interface, I was a little bit lazy. So like we import moment, in addition to moment being in the gem file here, and it needs to be here for the front end as well, because we have some time countdowns. It's in the package JSON as well. And so this, when you pull it down to the package JSON, that's where it's available for importing into the JavaScript. And then at that point, we're using the imported version. There's not the squiggly, and it's not the globally available version. I definitely don't recommend like relying on globally available variables inside like your Webpack built code. Maybe if you need to as part of a transition process, or you can, like maybe that's okay. But in general, like you want those imports to kind of statically indicate where your dependencies are coming from and stuff like that. So I think that's definitely the preferable way. And again, I guess if you're in Rails 6 and you don't have the asset pipeline, that's probably what you're going to end up needing.
Yeah, you're not going to get that kind of functionality in Rails 6 using, like, importing into moment Rails. You're not going to have that globally. Instead, there's a Webpack config file within your config initializers or config Webpack YAML that you can import into the library so it's globally accessible.
Oh, yeah. Here's our web. Do you know off the top of your head?
It's under just config and then Webpack YAML.
Cool, yeah, I didn't need to mess with this. And I remember you mentioning that. Cool. So this is all available out of the box, but you can also tweak it.
In the Webpack folder and then environment.js.
Okay. Sorry, I was just there. Webpack. Environment.js.
Yeah, so I forget the syntax, but in there you can import in Jquery and get your $sign globally accessible across all that.
Gotcha. Do you happen to recall if that's in the Webpacker README? What? Gotcha. You had mentioned this in the podcast as well, but like the Webpacker README is not intended to teach you Webpack or like ES6 imports or anything like that. Like it's for the tool itself. And so like I'm looking forward to the resources from Drifting Ruby and other stuff, the newsletters, to say, hey, cool, like Webpacker is here, it's the default. Like here's pointers for all of us as Rails developers to start getting into these tools.
So is that have anything on it?
Ooh, that's a good question. It is linking me back to the same page. I guess that's a no.
That's the answer.
Yeah, that's the answer. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the community kind of adding those resources. It'll be good. Cool. Cool. Well, thank you guys again so much for letting me come. It was great to talk about this. Like, let's chat on Slack and on Twitter and stuff like that. And I look forward to your JavaScript adventures. Thanks.